Explosions, thunder in the valley, and tracer fire stitches the dawn. The firefight is about to swallow the ridge. Amid the chaos, one sniper lay hidden, her world narrowed to a single heartbeat and a single shot. Her finger was on the trigger, ready to fire, when cold steel pressed against the back of her skull. A voice whispered in accented English, "Move, and you die." In that instant, Staff Sergeant Arden Vale knew the shot she had prepared for 47 minutes was gone. But what her captor didn't know was that she had trained 3 long years for this exact nightmare. And in 1.7 seconds, the hunter would become the hunted. The ridge sat like a silent jawline carved against the dawn, a place where rock and shadow met in jagged symmetry. To the untrained eye, it was only wilderness. But to those who lived and died in its contours, it was a chessboard of angles, blind spots, and opportunities. Dust clung to the air, a fine veil stirred by distant artillery echoes. Somewhere far below, the valley stirred with enemy activity, fleeting shadows against the fractured landscape. Above it all, still as the stone she rested upon, lay Staff Sergeant Arden Vale. She was not the kind of figure war movies linger on. No swagger, no bravado, no theatrics. Instead, Arden embodied something quieter, more unnerving, competence refined until it was invisible. Her expression revealed little beyond the discipline etched from years of repetition. Patience was her weapon long before the rifle ever was. She had learned to make silence an ally, stillness a disguise, and invisibility a kind of dominance. On her lap rested the long, deliberate weight of a Barrett 50 caliber rifle. Not merely a firearm, but a calculated extension of physics. At over 29 pounds, it was a beast to carry, but in her hands it was an instrument as delicate as a surgeon's scalpel. Its scope transformed landscapes into patterns of geometry. Its ammunition carried the power to fold distance into finality. The weapon was not a symbol of power, but of precision, a promise that if Arden chose a target, distance would not protect them. Her ghillie suit blended into the rock and scrub so convincingly that even birds hopped past her without alarm. The craft mattered, fibers and fabric woven together with natural vegetation, turning her into a breathing fragment of terrain. From 100 meters away, she was gone. From 10 meters, she was a blur. Even at arm's length, the unprepared eye would struggle to find her. For Arden, camouflage was not a costume. It was a mindset. The discipline of becoming a part of the environment until separation itself disappeared. Through her scope, 4 figures moved with a purposeful caution that confirmed the intelligence reports. They were not ordinary fighters. One carried the antenna and gear of a communications specialist, the kind of operator who linked field units to command networks. Another bore the long silhouette of a sniper's rifle, a professional, not a conscript, whose presence alone meant danger for any American patrol. The final 2 acted like guardians, scanning the terrain with protective vigilance, their posture betraying training and habit. High-value targets, every one of them. Arden noted their formations, their pauses, the way they spoke into radios and checked bearings against the valley. It was choreography she had studied in manuals and live exercises. Reconnaissance with a mission to chart patrol routes and exploit weaknesses. If these men succeeded, American soldiers would walk into ambushes. If Arden succeeded, those ambushes would never exist. That was the calculus of her presence here. 4 lives traded for dozens, perhaps hundreds, of her own comrades. She adjusted her scope, aligning reticle with the chest of the comm specialist. Atmospheric pressure, wind speed, humidity, each variable filed and solved in her mind. The valley stretched at 847 meters. She had calculated every factor. Breathing slowed, heart aligned with rhythm, pressure against trigger measured at 3.2 pounds. Just shy of the break point. Perfection lined up in front of her, a shot that could rewrite the day. But in this moment, perfection was fragile. The longer she held, the more variables shifted. Wind gusts, sunlight angles, the twitch of a target's head. The sniper's paradox was that even eternity could be ruined by a blink. Arden knew this better than anyone. Everything can be perfect and still fail. Arden Vale had measured the wind, noted the humidity, tracked the subtle drift of mirage in her scope. Her calculations were spotless, refined through 3 years of study, Countless hours on ranges and endless drills in mountains far from here. The shot was aligned, her heart slowed to its practiced cadence. The calm specialist in her crosshairs stood exposed, oblivious to the lethal geometry unfolding from nearly a kilometer away. Success seemed inevitable. Then came the pressure. Cold steel pressed against the base of her skull, an intrusion so sharp and undeniable that the entire battlefield seemed to tilt. The whispered words followed a breath later, laced with accented English. "Move and you die." It was not shouted, not panicked. It was calm, confident, the kind of delivery that announced a professional. Arden had not been surprised by a nervous conscript, but by a hunter who had managed the unthinkable to slip behind her without her awareness. The human body has an instinctual reaction to a weapon against the head. Muscles tighten, lungs seize, thought blurs. But Arden's training had conditioned her to override instinct with calculation. She did not flinch. Her mind shifted modes in an instant, moving from long-range engagement to survival contingency. Sniper doctrine acknowledged this nightmare. Operators isolated in denied territory could be discovered, captured, even killed in silence. The doctrine provided generic rules. But Arden had learned what mattered most. Rules break. When the rulebook shatters, improvisation becomes survival. Her breathing stayed even, her movements frozen. She let the captor feel in control. Compliance was the mask. Calculation was the reality. She began running scenarios in her head. Weapon retention, distance to escape routes, probable size and weight of the enemy, leverage points, the likelihood of reinforcements nearby. Her hands poised near the Barrett shifted ever so slightly, not in rebellion, but in preparation. The massive rifle, nearly 30 pounds of steel, was no longer just a precision tool, but a potential club, shield, or distraction. The voice commanded her again, "Drop weapon slowly." "Seu." Arden obeyed, lowering the rifle with deliberate slowness, letting its heavy frame touch the ground. She knew how captors thought, that a disarmed sniper became harmless, a captured technician of war stripped of her only instrument. That assumption was her window. Every captor who underestimated the human behind the rifle created opportunity. She listened carefully to his breathing, to the faint scrape of boots on stone, to the angle of his shadow creeping across the rock face. His confidence betrayed him, the slight relaxation in his stance, the assumption that physical dominance ensured control. Arden had spent years training specifically to exploit that illusion. Instructors at advanced survival schools had driven home the lesson with brutal clarity. Never accept the role of prisoner. You are always still a weapon. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Arden calculated her timing. Deflection of the barrel, strike to the throat, knee to the solar plexus, weapon strip. The sequence had been rehearsed until muscle memory replaced thought. She could feel her body tighten, coiled like wire, yet outwardly she remained submissive. She whispered a short breath, almost a sigh, to steady the rhythm of what would come next. What shifts in a trained mind? Not panic, not surrender, but reclassification of the environment. The ridge was no longer a sniper's perch, but a close-quarters arena. The Barrett ceased to be a rifle and became weighted leverage. The enemy's voice was not simply a threat, but a map of his composure, revealing overconfidence. Every assumption he made was ammunition in her hands. He believed she was helpless. She knew helplessness was camouflage. Arden's internal clock ticked. 1 beat, 2 beats, then action. In a single fluid movement, her hand snapped the barrel aside while her elbow thrust backward into the enemy's throat. His gasp was a choked rattle, oxygen cut off before panic could even register. Simultaneously, her knee surged upward into his solar plexus, collapsing his stance. She stripped the weapon with ruthless efficiency, pivoting as his body crumpled. In less than 2 seconds, 1.7 by later calculation, the hunter had become the prey, sprawled on the rock with his own rifle torn from his grip. She did not hesitate, securing him, scanning, resetting the perimeter. It was all part of the same rhythm. The ridge that had seemed lost to her moments earlier was once again hers. Yet Arden knew this was not merely about survival. It was about adaptation, about proving that even when every calculation shatters, the trained mind forges new equations. This moment shows why elite operators are feared. No manual covers the instant when rules collapse. Arden Vale survived not by following doctrine, but by breaking it with purpose and turning the enemy's assumptions into her weapon. She lowered the Barrett with painstaking slowness, every inch of movement calculated not for surrender, but for deception. To the enemy behind her, the gesture signaled obedience. To Arden Vale, it was choreography, a setup, a silent overture to violence. The rifle's 29-pound mass descended until it touched stone, and in that single detail lay the first trap. The weapon's sheer weight would anchor and pivot in ways her captor had not considered. Her breathing slowed further, her mind narrowing until the chaos of the valley below disappeared. There was no comms specialist in her scope anymore. No patrol routes at risk, no grand mission. There was only geometry, distance between her elbow and his throat, the angle of his stance, the weight distribution in his boots. She cataloged each variable as though solving a theorem under impossible pressure. The whisper came again, colder this time. "Stand! Slow! Hands up!" He wanted to parade her down to the valley, a trophy for his comrades. The thought nearly made her laugh. He believed she was already a prisoner. What he didn't know was that Arden had never accepted captivity as a condition. She had been taught to see it as another form of terrain. The instant arrived. She flexed her right hand, fingers brushing the Barrett stock. The enemy shifted slightly forward, rifle pressed firmer to her skull. That subtle change, confidence tightening into carelessness, was the opening. In under 2 seconds, muscle memory took over. Her right hand shot backward, slapping the barrel aside so it no longer pointed at her head. Simultaneously, her left elbow struck like a piston into the soft hollow of his throat. The sound was grotesque, a wet, collapsing gasp as cartilage folded and air vanished. Before he could even process pain, her knee drove upward into his solar plexus, the shock wave stealing breath and balance in one brutal motion. He staggered, choking, trying to clutch his throat. Arden was already twisting, stripping the AK from his hands with ruthless precision. The rifle clattered once against the rock, then was hers. She pivoted to face him, weapon ready, though the man was already crumpling, gagging for air that would not return. His body hit the ridge like discarded gear, limbs tangled, eyes wide with disbelief. The hunter had become the hunted, and Arden, the woman he had thought disarmed, now held not only his rifle, but his radio, his gear, and his very life. She didn't waste the moment with reflection. Operators could not afford victory laps. She scanned the ridge, listening for shouts, scanning for movement. Nothing yet. The other 4 enemy fighters below had not noticed. For now, this reversal was invisible. A private duel no one else had witnessed. Perfect. She knelt, stripping the man of his communication set, fingers quick but methodical. Every scrap of intelligence mattered. Maps tucked in a pocket, a coded notebook, spare magazines. Even his boots told her something. Tread patterns that could reveal patrol routes. She cataloged everything as fast as muscle memory allowed. Then came the decision. She could kill him now. Clean, final. But training had drilled nuance. A living captive was more valuable than a corpse. She bound him with cord taken from his own kit, securing arms and legs, and dragged him into a crevice shielded by brush. He would not raise the alarm. He might, in fact, provide answers. Arden lifted her Barrett once more, returning to her perch. The irony wasn't lost on her. The rifle that moments ago had nearly been her downfall was once again her partner. She peered through the scope. The comms specialist below was still visible, still moving with the oblivious grace of someone who believed the valley was safe. He had no idea his protector lay unconscious above, silenced by a woman he had never seen. It had taken exactly 1.7 seconds to reclaim the ridge, seconds that would echo into hours, days, maybe years. Because Arden knew the reversal wasn't just survival, it was momentum. What had begun as her near capture was now a tactical windfall. New intelligence, a prisoner, and the initiative to rewrite the mission itself. Her pulse steadied again, settling into its sniper's rhythm. The mission wasn't over. In fact, it had just expanded. What makes this moment powerful is its precision. Close combat may look chaotic, but Arden Vale's 1.7-second reversal shows mastery, not myth. The rifle mattered less than the operator. She turned weakness into advantage, proving what separates an ordinary soldier from an elite one: the ability to redefine the battlefield in an instant. With her captor unconscious and secured in a crevice, Arden Vale finally had breathing room, but no time to waste it. She dropped to one knee, pulled the enemy's radio set from his gear, and adjusted the frequency dial. Static burst to life, then broke into fragments of coded chatter. The words were terse, clipped, bouncing across channels. Within seconds, she realized the truth. The four men in the valley were not alone. The net was larger, more dangerous, and far better organized than command had suspected. A quick intercept confirmed it. 12 fighters in total, spread across multiple vantage points, each reporting to a central node. Their task wasn't random reconnaissance. It was coordinated surveillance of American patrol routes. These weren't ordinary foot soldiers, but an intelligence-gathering element designed to prepare ambushes. Arden's stomach tightened. Her mission brief had assumed 4 targets, high value but manageable. Now the chessboard looked different. 12 pieces moving in concert, 12 radios that could triangulate any American movement, 12 men whose survival meant more U.S. casualties down the line. She weighed her options quickly. Option 1, take the win, execute the original 4, exfiltrate with her prisoner, and call it a day. Clean, simple, low risk. It would meet the letter of her mission orders. No one would question it, but option 2 pulsed louder in her mind. Neutralize the entire net. All 12. Shut down their surveillance before it could bloom into deadly ambushes. It was the more dangerous path, but it was also the only way to truly protect the soldiers who would walk this valley tomorrow. The problem wasn't just tactical, it was political. If the enemy realized they'd been hit by a sniper, the response would be fierce. Reinforcements would flood the valley, and command would face questions about escalation in a politically fragile region. A sniper's presence could not be advertised. Attribution had to be avoided at all costs. That meant Arden needed to make deaths look like accidents, malfunctions, or the environment itself. This was where tactical imagination replaced the rulebook. She could not simply line up 12 shots and tick them off like a firing range. That would be obvious. Instead, she would have to wage war with creativity. The ridge, the rocks, the equipment in their hands. Everything became a weapon if applied with cunning. Her mind began mapping solutions. A suppressed round into a comms pack at just the right moment could create the illusion of equipment failure. A spark, a fire, an accidental detonation. A carefully placed charge on a loose ridge could trigger a rock slide, burying 2 men while looking like nature's wrath. Gear could be sabotaged during infiltration, causing rifles to jam or vehicles to lurch fatally. Even misinformation could be sown with the stolen radio, feeding false positions that led enemy fighters into their own traps. Each method carried risks, but together they formed a mosaic of plausible deniability. If done right, no one would suspect a single American sniper had dismantled an entire recon cell. It would look instead like bad luck, bad equipment, and bad timing. Arden cleaned the blood from her hands, stowed the radio, and adjusted her scope again. Below, the 4 original targets continued their patrol, oblivious to how close death had already brushed them. She exhaled slowly. The operation she had prepared for was gone. In its place stood something larger, more complex, and infinitely more dangerous. But she was ready. This was the kind of fight she had trained for, the kind of battlefield where improvisation mattered more than doctrine. She had been taught to expect the unexpected, and when it arrived, to reshape it into an opportunity. The unconscious prisoner behind her was proof already. What had started as a failure, being caught, nearly executed, had become her lever into the enemy's world. Now she would use his equipment, his codes, and his assumptions against the rest of them. She steadied her rifle, adjusted for wind, and waited for the first opening. The mission wasn't over, it had only expanded. The real difference lies between those who follow orders and those who adapt them. Arden could have stopped at 4 kills, but 12 enemies demanded more. In special operations, rules are scaffolding, not cages. Survival comes from imagination, deception, and timing. Arden Vale proves that success belongs to those who dare to improvise, even when risks grow. Arden did not choose a single loud confrontation. She assembled a mosaic of small, precise actions that, combined, would collapse the enemy's reconnaissance net without announcing an external hand. The plan had to preserve plausible deniability. It had to turn hazard into alibi. Over the next hours, she moved like a ghost through the margin of the battlefield, a sequence of interventions stitched together by timing, patience, and ruthless logic. First, acoustic masking and suppressed engagements. Arden timed required shots to align with the valley's natural noises. Distant artillery thumps, a landslide, or the roar of a far vehicle. Suppressed rounds, used sparingly, prevented classic triangulation. When a muzzle report had to occur, she made it sound like a failing engine or collapsing ridge. The goal was simple: remove targets without directing attention. Second, environmental sabotage. She surveyed the terrain for weaknesses. Loose scree above a patrol path became a tool. A small, precisely placed charge would look like gravity and weather combined. Angles that encouraged rockfalls, gullies that directed debris, brittle overhangs. When carefully manipulated, these features could bury sentries, destroy gear, and leave no bullet casings to trace. Third, mechanical and equipment failure. Soldiers rely on tools, and tools can fail when subtly intervened with. Arden introduced flaws that manifested as accidents. A kinked fuel line, a compromised firing pin, a frayed cable at a crucial joint, a radio that smoked and died, a rifle that jammed, or a vehicle whose throttle stuck could end lives while leaving investigators asking about maintenance and luck. Fourth, psychological disruption. Using the captive's radio and crafted transmissions, Arden injected doubt into routines. She mimicked false coordinates and fed misleading chatter. Background noise that phrased coordination. Misinformation created hesitation, misplaced regroupings, and sometimes internal distrust. When fighters began to doubt orders or equipment, they scattered or made mistakes that left them vulnerable. Fifth, surgical long-range shots. When eliminating a specific individual was necessary, Arden staged impacts to appear incidental. An engine compartment struck during movement, a fuel drum hit as men took cover. The incidents were precise but staged to look like mechanical catastrophe. Her ballistics made these incidents convincing. Suppressed and timed, such shots dissolved into ambient chaos rather than pointing to a hidden operator. Sixth, layered extraction and misleading trails. Arden planned ingress and egress meticulously. She left false signs of departure in one direction while slipping away on another. Old footpaths, animal trails, and dry riverbeds hid predictable lines of retreat. The traces she left were curated. Boot prints suggesting other units, broken branches implying different routes, smear marks trackers would misread. When search parties followed the obvious trail, they found misdirection. Piece by piece, these techniques compounded. A comms node died not from a bullet, but from a device failure triggered after a small detonation. A sentry vanished under what looked like a natural rock slide. A patrol vehicle lurched and burned when a sabotage line failed under stress. Each event, taken alone, pointed to misfortune or equipment problems. Together, they collapsed the net and obscured the pattern that could lead back to Arden. Her work demanded restraint. The temptation to solve problems with blunt force was constant, but force leaves trace. Arden preferred absence. The absence of a clear cause, the absence of a smoke trail leading home. The goal was to reduce threat while increasing ambiguity. In this ambiguity, enemies blame one another, assume bad luck, and postpone coordinated retaliation. Valuable time and space for Arden's side. The operation required muscle as well as mind. There were physical tasks, placing charges, manipulating gear, climbing into blind spots. Arden moved with practiced stealth, crawling for hours, sometimes sprinting to a new vantage in near silence. Her body had to fit the plan as tightly as her rifle fit her shoulder. By noon, pockets of the reconnaissance net had stopped communicating. By early afternoon, multiple nodes were offline. Radio traffic dissolved into static and confusion. A quartering patrol failed to rendezvous. A vehicle labeled as security never returned. The Valley's choreography unraveled not from brute force, but from carefully engineered accidents that left no smoking gun. Extraction came on stitched timing. Arden signaled an overhead element with encrypted bursts she knew would pass scrutiny. A shadowed rotor arrived where no one expected it, slipped low and lifted her from a scrubbed clearing. She carried the captured radio and some gear as trophies and tools, evidence to analyze later. As she touched down aboard the extraction craft, Arden allowed a brief, cold satisfaction. The operation had been surgical, quiet, and systemic. It left lives saved and no clear enemy narrative to spur immediate revenge. In modern battlefields where politics and optics constrict responses, ingenuity can be decisive. Back at base, intelligence teams would later trace subtle patterns. Maintenance records altered, clustered equipment anomalies, and repeated rockfall reports coinciding with patrol movements. Small clues that hinted at deliberate manipulation and a mind-reshaping chaos into cover. This sequence underlines an essential truth of advanced operations. Victory is often manufactured from small, precise acts rather than grand gestures. Imagination, patience, and low-signature tactics can achieve strategic effects with minimal political footprint. Arden's method was not spectacle. It was calculation applied with restraint. That restraint is what turns tactical cleverness into strategic advantage. The valley was quiet when the extraction bird came in low, hugging the contours like a shadow. Arden Vale crouched in the scrub of a hidden clearing, gear packed, prisoner secured and gagged. She raised her beacon, transmitting in the brief encrypted bursts that were indistinguishable from atmospheric noise. A faint vibration rolled through the ground as rotor blades crept closer. Then the helicopter slid into view, dust spiraling in controlled fury. Two operators jumped out, scanning with weapons up. Arden didn't need fanfare. She dragged the unconscious captive by the collar, slung her Barrett over her shoulder, and jogged toward the bird. The prisoner was hoisted in, bound more tightly and stowed beneath the watch of a crewman. Arden climbed aboard, handing over the captured radio, maps, and gear with the detached focus of someone who had not yet allowed herself to exhale. The helicopter lifted. From above, the valley looked deceptively still. No trace of the sabotage, the misdirection, or the quiet precision that had dismantled an entire reconnaissance net. Arden leaned back, exhausted but alert, knowing that the fight was not over. The battlefield was only one arena. The next would be the briefing rooms. Back at base, the debrief began with silence. A dozen senior officers sat around the table as Arden placed the evidence in front of them. The enemy's radio set, the marked maps, coded notebooks, and her own annotated log. The after-action report, AAR, was laid out not with theatrics, but with the cold clarity of data. She described how the mission had shifted from 4 high-value targets to a 12-man reconnaissance cell. She outlined each step: the capture, the reversal, the intelligence triage, and the systematic dismantling of the net. The officers listened, faces unreadable. When she detailed the environmental sabotage and psychological manipulation, some scribbled notes, others frowned, a few exchanged looks. Colonel Sloan Park spoke first. His voice carried both admiration and caution. Your initiative neutralized threats beyond your brief, but we must ask, at what point does improvisation blur into deviation? Doctrine exists for consistency. If every operator redefines missions at will, we invite chaos. Before Arden could answer, General Annika Dreyer leaned forward, eyes sharp. With respect, Colonel, what Vale did is exactly what doctrine lacks. Rules did not dismantle that net. Ingenuity did. She acted within the spirit of the mission: protect American lives. Her approach prevented ambushes that could have killed dozens. We should be codifying this flexibility, not questioning it. The room shifted. Debates sparked. Control versus creativity, consistency versus improvisation. Arden sat still, listening, aware that her methods had ignited a larger conversation than she ever intended. She was not defending only her choices, but a philosophy of warfare. In the end, consensus took shape. Arden was promoted, recognized not only for the tactical victory, but for demonstrating the potential of advanced cross-disciplinary training. She was assigned to help create a new curriculum for operators, one that fused sniper precision with sabotage, deception, survival, and psychological warfare. Colonel Park would oversee the doctrinal review, ensuring safeguards and structure. His caution remained: the military could not function on improvisation alone. But General Dreyer pushed the vision further, advocating for an advanced individual operator program, a pathway for select personnel to develop the kind of lateral thinking Arden had displayed. For Arden, the recognition was bittersweet. She had not sought doctrine, she had sought survival. Yet she understood the necessity. Her 1.7-second reversal, her environmental tricks, her manipulation of radios, these were no longer personal improvisations, but case studies. What she had done alone on that ridge would ripple outward, taught to others, debated in symposiums, perhaps written into manuals with classified circulation. She stood at attention as the session closed, her expression calm but her mind circling with unease. In winning the day, she had also become a symbol. That was heavier than the Barrett on her shoulder. This stage highlights the clash between military tradition and battlefield reality. Institutions seek predictability, but war punishes rigidity. Arden Vale's actions showed that elite operators don't just follow doctrine, they expand it. She never set out to change the playbook, yet her performance proved that innovation in combat isn't optional. It's survival. Months later, the echoes of Arden Vale's ridgeside improvisation had not faded. They had become curriculum. In a secluded training compound, she stood before a new cohort of operators, handpicked from special forces, aviation, signals, and intelligence. These were not raw recruits. They were already elite. Yet they had come to learn something their careers had never offered: how to think like Arden did when the rulebook broke. The lessons were unlike anything in the standard manuals. Instead of starting with marksmanship, Arden began with unpredictability. Students were tasked to improvise under stress, moving through scenarios where their gear failed, radios jammed, or orders contradicted one another. They learned to exploit terrain creatively, to see a broken vehicle as cover or a faulty radio as a tool for deception. The emphasis was less on firepower and more on cognitive agility, the art of weaponizing chaos. She taught interdisciplinary tradecraft, bridging skills that had traditionally been siloed. A sniper practiced psychological deception. A communications specialist learned the mechanics of demolitions. Medics rehearsed covert reconnaissance. Each cross-training module blurred the lines, forcing students to abandon comfort zones. Your specialty is a foundation, Arden told them, but survival requires borrowing from every discipline. The enemy won't respect categories, so neither can you. Stress ethics became another cornerstone. Arden insisted that improvisation carried responsibility. Students faced dilemmas staged to test judgment, whether to sabotage at the risk of civilian harm, whether to manipulate misinformation that could spiral. The discussions were heated, unresolved, and deliberate. Arden reminded them that ingenuity without discipline could turn genius into liability. Beyond the compound, debates surged at higher echelons. The question was force design. Should these graduates be sprinkled into existing special operations teams, injecting unpredictability into conventional frameworks? Or should they form dedicated units, built entirely around cross-disciplinary innovation? Colonel Sloan Park, ever the institutionalist, leaned toward integration. We cannot create splinter forces every time one operator excels. These methods must strengthen our joint elements, not fracture them. He saw Arden's curriculum as a supplement, a layer of resilience folded into existing doctrine. General Annika Dreyer pushed in the opposite direction. Low signature capability demands more than supplements. We need units designed for ambiguity itself. Scaling this isn't about teaching tricks. It's about cultivating an identity. Her advocacy framed Arden's program as the seed of a specialized force, stealthy, adaptive, and untraceable. The debate never fully resolved, but its existence was proof of Arden's impact. What had been one woman's survival on a ridge had grown into an institutional struggle over the future of warfare. And Arden, now both teacher and symbol, understood the paradox. Her greatest victory was no longer the elimination of 12 fighters. It was persuading a rigid system to evolve, not through speeches or papers, but by showing that when doctrine failed, imagination could save lives. In the end, Arden Vale's story is more than a tale of one sniper on a ridge. It is a reminder that life, like combat, rarely follows the rulebook. Her survival came not from strength alone, but from adaptability, imagination, and the courage to redefine the moment when everything seemed lost. And isn't that true for us today? Whether it's navigating health, work, family, or the rapid changes of our world, the lesson is the same. Rigidity can break us, but flexibility can save us. For American culture, built on resilience and reinvention, Arden's experience speaks directly. Innovation isn't reserved for battlefields. It lives in how we face hardship, how communities support one another, and how ordinary people rise to extraordinary moments. So I want to ask you, what lesson do you see in Arden's story? Is it about discipline, about improvisation, or about never underestimating the quiet strength inside us all? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective may inspire someone else listening today. Thank you for joining us for this journey. If you found meaning here, please like this video, subscribe for more untold stories, and help us keep these voices alive.